As you listen to this, bear in mind how sophisticated these mobsters were. These guys from the cities. They came out of the Depression era and all that. They weren't educated at all, but they pulled this scam off, this frontman thing, and it was complicated. It was complex. They got these guys licenses. They're frontmen. They got them licenses. They poured money into their bank accounts so the IRS would know they had the money to buy into these casinos. So it pretty well thought out. Anyway, here we go. Sachs and Tubman. In the 1980s, Al Sachs, he was a gambler. Herb Tobman, or Tubman, was a business investor. They took over the mobbed up and very troubled Stardust Casino Hotel because Alan Glick and Lefty Rosenthal, who was a mistake all the way around, they were booted out by the government because of their ties to the Cleveland and the Chicago mobs. Sachs had been around casinos since the 40s. He worked as a dealer back in Chicago when they had big dollar poker games that were held in the Jewish neighborhoods on the west side, or that had once existed on the west side. And they were supervised by Dave Yaras and Lenny Patrick. He had also worked as a manager down in the Havana casinos pre-Castro. In 1955, he opened the Royal Nevada Casino. That failed, but it stayed alive because the Stardust bought it and used it as an extension of their hotel. So it was alive until I think the 80s, probably. So in other words, if they had a big act in the rooms were booked, they'd push over to the casino, to the Nevada casino. In 1958, he was on paper a minor investor which made him could push him up inside the casino in the very mobbed up Tropicana. He joined the Stardust in the early 70s, but him and Alan Glick just went head to head. It didn't work out, so he left. He became manager of the Aladdin in 1977. But you see how this guy went from a car dealer to Aladdin's a big organization. Then we've got Herb Tubman, who worked at the Catskill Mountains Resort as a bellhop and then later on as a gas station attendant in Las Vegas. By the way, young people, gas stations, I think the only state left that you can't pour your own gas is New Jersey. But it was all over America. You didn't get out of your car. A guy came out and he pumped your gas for you. And in the 70s, when gas prices just went through the freaking roof uh, because of mismanagement by the Carter administration, there wasn't a gas shortage. That ended, and you had to get out and you had to pump your own gas. So anyway, and then he became a real estate investor, a furniture store owner. He owned a cab company. He operated a diner, and then lo and behold, in the 50s, he's the general manager of a mobbed up, but racially integrated casino, the first in the state of Nevada, the Moulin Rouge. You know the story behind that? There was a black guy who wanted to come into one of Mo Dalitz's casinos, and the manager complained. He said, there's this colored guy trying to get in. And Dallas said, what color is his money? And he says, green, of course. He said, well, you know, that's what we need here. What world are you working in? So Dalits integrated the casinos. In 1971, anyway, Tobman becomes the general manager for the Aladdin, again, right up there with his pal Sachs. So the problem with Sachs and Tubman was that no matter what casino they managed, money disappeared from the count room. And they denied loudly, they denied often that they allowed mafia guys to skin from the casinos and that they were little more than figureheads. They insisted this wasn't true. You know the word is a good Yiddish word, chutzpah? Well, there you go. That defines chutzpah. In 1979, the partners formed the Trans Sterling Corporation to take over the Stardust. What happened was at about the same time, Joe Leblonsky became the special agent in charge of the FBI office in Vegas. So at the end of this, what I'm creating, I put a tape on, which gives you a much better explanation about Yablonsky. So one morning, Yablonsky and a junior agent are having coffee at the Riviera Casino. When Yablonsky looks over, he sees Herb Tubman across the room. He's having coffee with Mo Dalitz and Morris Kleinman, a big-time silent partner in the casinos. On the way out, Tubman stupidly stopped at Yablonsky's table, and good-naturedly he put his arm around the junior agent and he said, he's nodding to Yablonsky, I guess you don't care who you're seen with. It was a joke, but Yablonsky was not a humorous guy, and he declared war on Tubman and Sachs by opening a standing investigation into their dealings, which included charges of skimming from the Fremont and the casino. That investigation, centering on these two, went on for 4 years. The investigation had awkward moments. Jablonski was Jewish, joined the temple. He was a very religious fellow. He joined the temple Beth Shalom, where Dalitz and Tubman were not only regular worshipers, but big contributors. So he had to see these guys, every Saturday or wherever he went. In 1984, Sachs and Tubman, were tossed out of the casino business by allegations of skimming. They were fined a record $3 million as part of the agreement to surrender ownership of the Stardust and their licenses. By the way, when I talk about Yablonsky, as you'll see in the tape later on, Yablonsky was there anyway. He was sent to tear apart the mob in Las Vegas. There's a part in this tape where he says he uses government speak. He says the agents who had been in Vegas prior to him were acclimated, I think is the word. In other words, they were corrupt, is what he's trying to say. In those days, though, today it actually makes the paper. In those days, they just swept it under the carpet. They had a big, huge PR firm within the FBI that took care of these things.
We're worried about.
You guys got to cut it out. I'm warning you now, all right?
When Tough Tony Spilatro issued warnings, people listened. In Las Vegas of the 70s and 80s, Spilatro was a feared presence, the mob ambassador to Nevada, suspected in nearly 24 gangland hits, the leader of a burglary and extortion ring later known as the Hole in the Wall Gang, and the man who protected the flow of the skim from mob-tainted casinos back to the mafia bosses in the Midwest. During the 70s, Spilatro's muscle protected the skim as it poured out of casinos owned by mob frontman Alan Glick and operated by Spilatro's pal Frank Lefty Rosenthal. Glick and Rosenthal were forced out of gaming, but the skimming continued. And that's when Joe Yablonsky came to town, hand-picked for the job of finally cleaning the mob out of Las Vegas.
I certainly did not think that everybody was a crook in Las Vegas. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Retired and living in Florida today, Joe Yablonsky remains sensitive to the charge that he came to town with an agenda. Going after organized crime was a top priority back then, he says, but in Las Vegas he found there remained a lot of loyalty to mobsters. The town revered such men as Mo Dalitz and Benny Binion, despite their status as longtime organized crime associates. It was tough to get a handle on Las Vegas.
You could be scorned for being seen with an FBI agent having lunch, and at the same time your prestige would be enhanced by having lunch with a Spilatro type.
Yablonsky was a cigar-chomping hotshot, nicknamed the King of Sting. He was sent to Las Vegas in part because the local office was underperforming.
There was a certain mistrust of the Las Vegas office, and I think that many of the agents who were assigned to Las Vegas became assimilated and didn't quite see things as they might in some other major city. And they may have believed that Mo Dalitz was the patron saint of the community, when in fact he was one of the founding fathers of the organized crime syndicate.
When Nevada officials gave a gaming license to Al Sachs to take over Alan Glick's tainted casinos, the FBI was amazed. Yablonsky's men began a new skimming investigation. They snapped photos of the skim in progress and made a case that bounced Sachs from gaming and put mafia bosses behind bars. They also busted Spilatro's hole-in-the-wall gang during a burglary, turned one of Spilatro's men into a government witness, and pressed indictments against Tough Tony himself. Spilatro was eventually murdered but was never convicted, in part because witnesses against him kept dying, and in part because of his lawyer, Oscar Goodman. Goodman says he never lost a case put together by Yablonsky. He suspects the FBI wanted to get him, too.
Let's put it this way. They took plenty of shots, but the truth of the matter was I never crossed the line. I was tough. I like to think I was tough. I represented my clients as vigorously as I could, but never violated the law. I think in his mind, in Yablonsky's mind, he had me as some kind of a consigliere rather than as a defense attorney.
He was coming on the CNBC Geraldo program. He had this little plastic rat, and he twisted the head off and said, "This is what we do to rats." And I'm saying, my God, you know, what we do to rats? Why these pronoun we, you know?